want a team, want a team, want a team. Each man and a lady from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.
Welcome to another episode of We Love Our Team. Along with my co-host Randy Freaking, we're pleased to welcome Nick Clooney to our podcast today. Cincinnati Reds fans.
Hi there, everybody. Good to be with you.
Cincinnati Reds fans will remember Nick as a host of the Nick Clooney Show, which aired on WKRC-TV in the early 1970s. Many of our listeners will no doubt remember Nick as the anchor of WKRC-TV News from 1975 to 1984. And others will remember Nick's stint as the host on American Movie Classics. Nick's career has been one of longevity and integrity, and we are honored to have him with us. So welcome, Nick.
Well, I'm glad to be with you, and thank you very much for the invitation. What you have proved so far is I couldn't hold a job.
Well, you were active. You were active and curious. I think you were curious. But so we're here today to talk about your Reds fandom. There's a lot we could talk about with you, no doubt, with your variety of a career. But this is our podcast is dedicated to Reds fans, and you certainly qualify. So, could you take us back to some of your earliest memories as a lifelong Reds fan?
Boy, you bet. I'd be delighted to. I was born in Maysville, Kentucky, all in the orbit of the Reds and the history of the Reds. We loved them. My uncles, who were my mentors, and they were all, of course, kids just about to go into the service. One ended up flying B-17s, and the other chasing monkeys in New Guinea. And both of them were great guys and ended up, but they always were Reds fans and had been forever, and their father had been a Reds fan going back to the 20s and before. And so I was just raised, I cut my teeth on being a Reds fan and all the things that the Cincinnati Reds introduced baseball to, including baseball itself, of course. I cannot say that I was part of the original team, but I wasn't far off. It was a great piece of knowledge that we always knew that in our estimation, of course, that we invented baseball, not Abner Doubleday or anybody else. It was us. There's no question about it. And we reveled in the fact that the first Major League night game was right there at Crosley Field. Oh, my. Great stuff.
So the Reds went to the World Series in 1939 and 1940. Do you have any memories from those teams?
Well, yes, I do, because I was actually only 8 years old, 7 year old, at the 1939, and then a year older, obviously, in the 1940 World Series. And I remember very well that my two uncles got such a kick out of the broadcasts of the 1940 team and the games of the World Series. The Reds won, of course, and they incidentally, it was a very good Detroit team, and they had a very fine pitcher whose last name was Rowe, R-O-W-E. He was known as Schoolboy Rowe, and that's what we all called him, and we kidded about him, and we kidded particularly after he won. I think it must have been the second game of the series, and my Uncle William and my Uncle George were very downcast when he won, but they started listening to him being interviewed, and he kept responding to the interviewer by saying, "How am I doing, Edna? How am I doing, Edna?" Apparently, Edna was either his wife or his girlfriend or someone there in between. But he could not stop. He had won the ball game, so he was thrilled. He was on the top of the world. He was in the World Series, and he had won. And he kept saying, "How am I doing, Edna?" And we could not stop. we couldn't stop saying that for 5 years thereafter. Here's my Uncle George flying B-17s, and he would ask the co-pilot, "How am I doing, Edna?" And they spent their life talking about that. I always wanted to meet Edna, and I was afraid I might be disappointed. So maybe it's just as well I didn't.
Hey, Nick, Crosley Field was a long way from Maysville, Kentucky. I assume you listen to some games on the radio, but I'm wondering if did you ever make the trek up to Crosley Field?
Only 2 times, and both of them were, and I got to see one night game, that was a big, exciting time. I was visiting relatives in Cincinnati, and my cousin took me there, and I got to see Johnny Vandermeer. Of course, he was wild as March hare. He was. I wouldn't want to stand anywhere close to the batter's box with that guy. I would be. I would likely just stay in the dugout and hope for the best, because my goodness, Johnny was. The stuff would. It always seemed to me when I was a little kid and I got to watch him, it seemed to me there was steam coming off that ball as it came down from the pitcher's mound. It was amazing to see. And then, of course, my hero of the days was Bucky Walters, and even up into the 40s and into the 50s. Of actually, Bucky, I guess, was pretty much finished as a major league player when the 40s ended. He was so well thought of by everybody. I remember the other game I went to see. For some reason or another, they were down to 2 umpires and they couldn't play the game. So they were all saying, who do we trust that could stand in for the other umpire? And they finally all agreed, the ball players all agreed that it could be Bucky Walters and nobody else. And Bucky actually was the first base umpire in that game that I went to see.
That's a great story.
Isn't that something?
That is something. Well, Randy's an umpire, so he can relate to that. He's a man of integrity, I think. So.
Yes, all right, good, I'm sure.
I can relate to that because occasionally, one or more partners won't show up for a game, and I'm stuck behind home plate by myself, Nick.
Yes, I would not envy you, not at all.
But maybe I should pick up on the Bucky Walters example by asking the 2 coaches if they respected one of their players to help me out. So I might tuck.
Well, it worked. It worked then, but have you got a Bucky Walters around? Did he?
Well, Johnny Vandermeer, that must have been something to see, because he, of course, is famous for throwing the back-to-back
the double no hits. The double no hits, of course. And the other wonderful thing was that, of course, everybody in my family, all the boys who were obviously major fans, but they thought that one of those games, one of those double no hits, was a night game, and we were sure that it was because it was a night game that he got that second no hitter, and people would argue that point. They would talk about that. We shouldn't be any night baseball. It should play under the sun or don't play, and it was. And they were blaming night baseball for more more shutouts and more no hitters. I'm not sure that there was any factual evidence to that, but we were sure. It is just not important to be right. It is very important to be sure.
Sometimes wrong, never uncertain. That's what.
That's exactly right.
So when you were a boy playing baseball in Maysville, I guess you probably played, either formally or informally, I'm guessing. Did you pretend to be Bucky Walters? Was he the guy that you pretended to be?
I knew that was too high a target for me. I couldn't be Bucky, and I couldn't be Paul Derringer, and I couldn't be Johnny Vandermeer. I couldn't be any of those guys. I couldn't be Joe Beggs, who was the fireman of the year back in those days, in the old days, and he was amazing. And then as the Reds fell on hard times there for a few years after 1940, and so I got to watch mostly the California League, because they all came and they were tied to the Reds, and as a farm team. And all of a sudden, my heroes were people nobody ever heard of. Eddie Airot, ever heard of him?
No, never heard of him.
Famous pitcher in the California League, and if you were playing out in California, everybody knew Eddie Airot. And at spring training every year, Eddie Airot would come up, and he was going to be the big pitcher for the Reds. That was for like 4 or 5 seasons in a row. In spring training, there'd come Eddie Airot. And not only that, we had a famous hitter who was going to challenge the Babe, because his name was Al Libke, Libke. Remember him?
No.
I have to confess.
These are my heroes. Wait a minute. I know one you will get. Grady Hatton. How about that?
Yes, Grady Hatton.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's
Absolutely.
the Beaumont, Texas Flash. Yes, that's great.
Well, that's what I think, interesting, Nick, that some of our younger listeners probably don't fully appreciate. But, St. Louis was the farthest west outpost of Major League Baseball
That's
for
exactly right.
For a long time.
Exactly, and we pointed it out regularly that it took forever from guys from the California professional leagues. It was AAA baseball, but it always seemed to us nobody or very few broke through in our lifetime straight from California to the bigs, and we very seldom saw that happen. And it was instead, you're quite right, the Midwest and the East seemed to be the ones that were growing the major leaguers in my day, when I was a kid.
Right. That's really interesting. Now you were in the Air Force, right? Is that where you got it? I think I saw that you got your start broadcasting on Air Force radio. Is that right?
No. I did do broadcasting in the service, but I was AUS, Army of the United States. I was a dog face.
Okay.
And I sky all the way to corporal.
All right. Well, so where were you based when you were in the Army?
Well, it ended up being in Germany, in Frankfurt, the American Forces Network, and the headquarters was in Frankfurt, Germany. Uh-huh. So spent the time there, and also I did news, radio news. That this was all radio before television joined the broadcast family in Army or service radio and television. So it was all radio at that time, and that was back in 50s, 54.
Wow.
I'm really old. I'm really, really old. It's shocking. I know I'm hearing a shocked silence from both of you.
No,
good
sir.
Lord,
No, sir.
have mercy. No, good Lord.
I think you're young at heart, Nick.
No, I'm not.
Were you able
old as the hills.
So were you able to keep abreast of what was going on with the Reds when you were over in Frankfurt? I imagine that was a little bit of a challenge.
Sure, we all we got baseballs. Usually, if it was baseball, that was fine. We had the lines, so we could get live broadcasting there. But mostly, if it was popular radio, which was still very important at that time. Those we came to us on transcription. Great big discs.
Really?
16-inch discs.
Wow. So were you a Waite Hoyt fan? I mean, do you remember Waite Hoyt?
Oh, big time. And I was so lucky that when I got to do a Cincinnati television show in the 50s and 60s, I got to Waite became a regular on my show, on my television show, and he and his wife would come and sit and listen, and I'd listen, and I would get to listen to his stories again, just like I used to when I was sitting in front of the railroad, in front of the radio. Do you know that we watched radio? Did you have any idea that we did? We'd sit right smack in front of it. We had the only big thing we had. We were standard poor. Everybody was poor in those days, but we had one great big thing. We had a great big table model Zenith radio. God knows we probably stole it. I can't imagine we could ever afford it. So I have no idea how we ended up with it, but we did. And we would watch that big Z on the Zenith, and it was color, you know. The dial itself was in color. And we'd sit and watch that Z and listen to what was coming over the radio. And it was a great time to watch radio.
That's great to watch radio. And I guess the broadcasters back then used to recreate the game, right? They'd add sound effects and
yeah, they sure did. They just had they had an actual bat, or the one I saw. Waite pointed this out to me. They had a bat and a block of wood, and it had to be the right wood. I guess it was ash, I suppose, but it had the right sound, and somebody had to be able to do that, and then they had a little bit of crowd noise, and they would and they did a good job making them up. Of course, nobody did it better than Waite. Good heavens, all those stunning afternoons. We all you remember that there were two very great pitchers for the Boston, not the Red Sox. This is the Braves.
The Braves.
This is there was Warren Spahn and Johnny Sain, and the great phrase from Boston, because they never quite got there. You know, they were right around the edge. They'd be in the first division, but they had this great phrase. All the fans, they said, "Here's our plan: spawn and Sain and pray for rain."
Pray for rain. Hey, Nick, you talk about the sound effects they did with the bat and the piece of ash, probably, because when the Reds were on the road back then, I think Waite Hoyt was in the studio or someplace in Cincinnati, and he would literally get like a transcription of the game over teletype. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And he could talk for 10 minutes when all the teletype said, "Outside, ball one." That was it. That's all you could see. And he'd talk for 10 minutes. The guy over there is having a beer. I wish I could have a beer. There's a burger. Got a burger ready.
Well, Nick, we kind of come full circle, because people listen to this podcast and stare at their phone, and so they watch our podcast.
I never even thought of that. Do you suppose anybody actually does that? That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Are you lying to me? Good. Is your nose growing at this very moment?
A little bit, just a little bit.
Okay. I'm here.
I see a lot of people walking around town looking down at their phones. They might be listening to this podcast.
They're watching our podcast. I love it. Well, we don't have many. We've had a number of guests, and we have not had any that I know of who were watching games before 1947, and I'm curious if it registered with you as a fan that all the players were white. Was that something?
You know something? We weren't nearly. We were very, very aware of the inequality in baseball. We got that. We knew about that even as a 6-year-old. I knew that there was something wrong there, and we just assumed that was nobody that would never change, and whatever was that at that moment would be the same forever. And I must say, we understood the inequality of it and how wrong it was. We got that. We didn't get how could it be changed? Who would change it? Who would be the person? How would that ever happen? We never could have figured out Montreal and far into the future and what was going to be happening with that astounding young athlete, that young baseball player. We couldn't imagine that would happen. We knew that it happened in football already. We knew that that color line had been broken there, but that was late 40s and very early 50s.
Yeah.
It was a very big deal, and we couldn't be imaginative enough at big fans, but not smart,
Yeah. No, it is amazing to me that it's still so relatively recently that the line was broken. I mean, I realize that it's 70 years, but still in the scheme of things,
that's not long.
It's amazing.
You know something that's the only advantage I can bring to your broadcast today is to let you know that 70 years, it's not so long.
Yeah.
It's not so long.
It's less than half
I'm the one that sit here. I'm at 90. I'm the one that can tell you the 70 years isn't all that long.
How fun was it to be a Reds fan in the 1970s, Nick? You were broadcasting by that point. You were back on the air. That must have been a great time.
And I got to meet the wonderful players, and all that, and it was great fun. I was doing news by then, and so I didn't get to see many games. I was always working,
Yeah.
And I was my shift started at 3 p.m. and went to 1 a.m. So I didn't have as many ball games as I wanted to, but I did get to meet. Mostly at special events, there'd be Tony Perez. He'd always show up. God bless him. Nobody like him. He was unbelievable. And I got to know Pete and got to know Johnny and all of them. Dave Concepcion. And we usually would be just doing benefits of one kind or another for the Cancer Society or something, And they'd show up, and so you get to know them. You'd get to meet their families sometimes, and that was a great time to be a Reds fan. You're exactly right. But I must tell you, it was not bad being a Reds fan back in 1948 when we were always in 7th place out of with an 8-team league. And we get these wonderful characters. Grady Hatton was one of them, but there was a guy named Eddie Lucan, and he was always a hero of mine, not because he was a great baseball player. He was a great American. The way I heard the story, and I heard it from my uncles who chased down these stories, and he had played just before World War II and the American entry into World War II. But then he was at first he joined, and then he ended up at the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow!
And after he got and his feet were frozen,
Ooh.
And when he came back, he started playing baseball again. He was in the minors, and then he ended up coming up with the Reds, and he was a left fielder. And every time he would, Crosley Field, famous for what they called the terrace. It was a damn hill, is what it was. You climbed the hill when you were running backwards
in left field,
to pick one off before it hit the wall, And he would run up, and my uncles finally realized, and that they read in the paper, his feet had been frozen, and he had a hard time running. And running up a hill particularly, and he literally fell down going up the hill to catch the can of corn, the easiest fly ball in the history of the world. And he couldn't play, but he became my hero. There was Eddie Lucan. He was running up the hill after the baseball, after he had run up the hill after hand grenades, a couple of years before.
Yeah. So many of those guys were heroes. I mean, we don't, and they wouldn't talk about it because they're part of that greatest generation. But Yogi Berra and Ted Williams and countless others, Hank Greenberg. I mean,
it was great stuff. Yeah, you're
Nick,
exactly
what do you remember
right.
about what do you remember about Grady Hatton in particular?
Oh, just he was the girls all loved him, so I thought he was a pretty good third baseman, but I didn't think he was good looking at all. I thought everybody I knew was better looking than he was, and I had no idea why my older sisters and my cousins were saying, "Oh, look at this Grady Hatton." Oh, big deal, Grady.
The jocks always get the girls, Nick. I mean, that's just how it goes.
It's terrible. It's terrible. It always worked out that way, didn't it? Never changed.
Always did.
I always had a face for radio. It was.
I remember. I went to this is the kind of thing that only happens in Cincinnati, right? But I went back to like my 50th 8th grade reunion, if you can believe that. And
yes, I can. Yes, I can.
I won't name names, but I will say that the guy who was the big jock in 8th grade had sort of put on a little weight and lost a little hair, and I thought, well, maybe the girls will finally talk to me, but they all still flocked around him. It just wasn't.
Well, they had better memories than you.
That's just how it went. Nick, I read your book, The Movies That Changed Us, and I really enjoyed that. I'm just
glad you did. It was hard work.
I'll bet.
Because with stuff. Yeah, these were. I took it very seriously when they asked me over to American Movie Classics to write it, and I took it very seriously. It took me 2 years to write it, and I'm glad I got some very smart and great baseball and movie lovers who wrote me after that book, and they enjoyed it, and that meant a lot to me.
Well, I think popular culture, like movies and sports, I mean, I think that can move the needle. I mean, I think certainly Jackie Robinson being able to succeed and just be the kind of gentleman and the player that he was, I think had something to do with moving integration along a little bit. And I think that
absolutely no question about it. There is absolutely no question about it. And he had the same courage that it took to hang out at Bastogne in 1964.
Yeah. So
these were very, very brave people.
Yeah, I was curious though, with movies, if you have any favorite baseball movies.
Oh, let me see. Well, I'm trying to think. I suppose it has. As I hear, this is a tough one, and the reason it is because it will sound cliche, but I'm sure, given my whole line, it's probably the natural. Probably so.
Oh, okay.
I think that would probably be me. It's very cliche to say so, but I remember I seem to be one of the fans of that era. I think I was that kid. I believe I was he.
Yeah.
I was always hoping that maybe I'd end up somewhere that something that I said would matter at some point in my life. I thought that would be great. I remember when I went to 13 schools, as my uncle used to say, we moved every time the rent came due, so that kept us going. And so I went to 13 schools. Among them were some great schools, but some of them weren't so great. And some of the areas where we lived weren't always great. I remember going to school at St. Francis Seraph in Liberty and Vine.
Yeah.
And I remember after I got well known, when I was the anchor, I loved to go back there, and I would walk, to take a walk. I'd just take a walk up Vine Street, or I'd stop at 12th or somewhere around there. And the kids, I'd look at them, and I remember that was me. I was one of them, except the color was different, but
Yeah.
everything else about them was exactly the same. And they would follow me, and they would, and I'd say, because I was famous, I was famous as far as they were concerned.
Sure.
And they would say, "What are you doing down here? What are you doing? There's no place for you to be. I'll be someplace else." And I say, "I went to school right over there," and I'd point to the school.
Oh,
And
that's
he said, "No,
fantastic.
you did not. You did not. You big liar." So I said, "Nope. I know exactly. I know who that teacher was, and I know and I know what you used to do. I know, and who made the zip gun. I knew who we all knew how to do it. It was, this is what you do." And I would walk, and then I'd go back to my car, which was new, and I would say, "You see that? That's my car. That's my car." And guess what? I went right to school where you go to school. Guess what you can do? Guess what you can do
That's
20
great.
years from now? Guess what you can do 10 years from now? You can get a new suit like I've got on right here. You can get a new car like I got right there. You can talk on television. You can be famous. You can be me. You can do that. And I loved doing that because they listened to me.
Yeah.
They listened because they thought I was famous, They thought I was something special, and I already knew better than that. I knew that a long time ago. I was from Maysville.
Well, there's a great mural of your sister just down the street now from St. Francis, Sarah.
Isn't that something?
That is awesome. That is awesome. And they lit it up during Blink. So that's funny that
You bet.
Yeah, that you went to school there. Well, so are you still following the Reds, Nick? Are you still paying attention? And
not nearly as much as I did because I'm doing. I got the grandkids, and we got stuff that we got to do.
I hear you.
So and every now and then I got enough relatives that they throw me a birthday party, and sometimes the birthday party lasts 2 weeks.
That's great.
And believe me, so I have no complaints. I've had a great run. I've had a wonderful life. There was not a moment of it that I regret. Not a moment of it. And I just wish that I had done better. I wish I had been a little smarter and been a little better at it, and I wish I had helped more people than I did in the racket. It was good enough. I have absolutely no complaints, none at all.
You've had a wonderful. Speaking of movies, you've had a wonderful life, Nick. For sure.
I have, and you're so right. You're so right, and I'm grateful to everybody who, to this moment, some guy comes up to me as last night. It was in Cincinnati, and I was taking a walk, and this guy came over and he said that was the best newscast I ever saw, and I said, well, there were pretty good ones, What do you think about Walter Cronkite? He said he was almost as good as you.
Hey, Nick.
That's a Cincinnati friend.
Nick, you're probably tired of these questions about your son George.
That is great. I'm not tired at all. I'm thrilled.
Okay. How about George? Was he a baseball fan growing up?
Oh God, yes.
A baseball player?
Oh, yeah. Yes, he was, and he was. When we went to Augusta, Kentucky, my daughter and my son were not amused. They did not think that was a good idea. Both of them were going to big-time schools. George was already enrolled at Malter, and my daughter was already enrolled at Mercy, or one of the. And they did not want to go to any place and yet when they got there, George, who was same height as me, 5'11", and he got to start in basketball. Not only that, and here in Augusta, he was the center. And not only that, he played baseball and he started, and he loved. He tried out for the Reds. You knew that, didn't you?
I've heard that story. Yeah, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's true. He really did. He had he was good. He had a pretty good arm, and he wasn't scared of the curveball. I was, but not he. He could play. He was a player, and I was very proud of that.
What position did he play?
Outfield.
Outfield.
Outfield. I'm sorry. Did I?
Yeah, you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, he played, and since it was a very small town here and a very small club, he played center field, and therefore he could go left and right. So
That's
it was okay.
great.
So he was a player. He was okay.
And he had something to fall back on. He had something to fall back on ultimately. So,
in case this thing doesn't work out,
His life might have been a little bit differently if that tryout with the Reds would have been successful.
And I don't know which one he wished for. I don't have any idea. But he was a great sports fan, and baseball first of all. That was his first sport. He never played basketball till he came down here to Augusta.
Huh.
He never did.
Maybe he needs to make a baseball movie.
But he played baseball.
Maybe he needs to make a baseball movie.
Yes, that'd be a good idea.
That'd be great. Well, listen, Nick, we have taken up a lot of your time, and we just so appreciate this. This is fun.
It doesn't take me long to bore you. I'm very good at that.
Well, this is great, and we thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us. And maybe we could do it again sometime.
You bet. Well, as soon as I figure out the technology.
All right. Good deal. Good deal.
Take care.
Love the studio audience. Another standing ovation for our guest. Might be for Jack.